elements like very rare in any kind of soil in Oregon. Rubidium. All these come out. Basically, if you had something that you thought was a Barnett Ramsey, or a Clymer, or a Thompson, and you have the book, you know what I mean, you could take it to MEI Charlton, and you could find out whether it has the right clay. So, now for scientists that means something else, but for collectors that's money in the bank. Next, please. Okay. So let's just let's see what I have here. If I had a light, I could see what I was like. Okay, so kind of summarizing the rest of the potters here. In Polk County, we had the Oregon Pottery Company, Freeman Smith and Sons. We had William Ramsey Jr., who was the son of a potter, and we went to his pottery in Iowa. That was in northern Iowa. Solomon Wade from Eola, who came from another part of Iowa. John Richardson, who came from New York. Then we had a father and son, Josiah and Joseph Hanna, who came from Missouri, from Callaway County, which I also visited. That Callaway County is also was a pottery county with a lot of good pottery clay. And they were potting the same style, as you'll see, as they did in Missouri. Washington County, we've never really, this man advertised twice with big advertisements to buy his stoneware, but we went to his place, we saw where his kiln might have been, but we found no evidence, no shards or anything like that. And then finally, in Douglas County, we had the potting pastor who was a traveling minister, Abbot Todd, who would bring pots to the various congregations and sell them at the congregations. The real thing to notice about this, and I'm not going to go into detail because we have other things to do, but the real interesting thing about this is that most of these potters, except Abbot Smith and Oregon Pottery Company, were not selling in what we call a market system now. They were not selling in a store. Oregon Pottery Company was selling in a hardware store in Albany. That's the closest they came to regular marketing. They were selling in what I call an agrarian exchange network. In other words, they were trading or bartering their pots to someone, a neighbor or someone who had a blacksmithing or tinsmithing or broom making. Edward Pedigo in Damascus I've determined what the occupations are. There were 8 different occupations that he was supplying in his little barter system. So you got to think of them. Many of these early ones, especially, were not operating in what we call a modern market system. Okay, next, please. This is from another clue that Ollie might want to get a hold of. This is from a book by a man named Cornelius Atwood, and it's on the Bennington potteries. Bennington, Vermont, was a big influence on all the potteries west of Vermont, and that meant nearly all the potteries in the Midwest and so forth. And this chart, they started in 1793, and they're still going strong. Bennington still is manufactured. Well, this chart, which was done by the author, shows the different shapes, so it's a guide. In other words, the very earliest shape they use, you can see that it's one of those rounded styles. This would have been in the 1793 to 1820 period. And then, I've got this backwards so you can't read these dates, but you can see that they went through a phase in the 1880s where they had straight sides. And then they went to one that had what we might call prominent shoulders and so forth. This morphology, it isn't 100% sure, but Bennington was so popular, still makes a very good stoneware, that it had influences all over the country. One of the places they influenced was Red Wing, Minnesota, where you had about 5 or 6 big potters right at Red Wing. And when the railroad started going to Spokane, the whole carloads from Red Wing, using the shapes of Bennington,
went to the Pacific Northwest in Spokane. Okay, so there are other ways of approaching the analysis of pot. Next, please. Okay, here we have a, let's see, make sure I know what we got here. We've got another, I threw in another Barnett Ramsey, so you can see that the shapes of, I was trying to get one where I could actually show the sparkle, but I never really did. Next, please. Okay, this is another potter. This potter actually was late in Oregon City, starting in 1880. He was maybe Oregon's first plumber too, and he sold plumbing supplies. His name was Charles Myers, and this is an example of a lot of his pottery. His son was sent to Buena Vista to learn how to make pots, so most of Myers' pottery looks like Buena Vista pottery. However, it's a little bit more elongated than Buena Vista pottery. He didn't last though. He was competing with Buena Vista, but he couldn't turn it out like they could. Next, please. Okay, this is an example of Samuel Grove, and Samuel Grove was one of the early potters in the Damascus area. He was the son-in-law of Edward Pedigo, who named Damascus, and was a potter himself. He potted very successfully until 1876, and then his whole operation melted down and burned. So he took his family and moved to a place called Eden Valley in Palouse in eastern Washington, and did very well there. We located him there too. Next, please. This is an example of the pottery of Josiah Hanna, who operated near Bedford, north of Bedford, Shady Cove, and so forth. And he too was tended toward elongated forms. Go on. Next, please. And this is an example of the pottery of Abbot Todd, the traveling preacher who took his potter pots with him and his wagon when he went to preach at a congregation, and he exchanged things. We have a record of him picking up a couple of brooms, something else, something tin, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but he exchanged things while he was on his trips. Next, please. And we see that again that the two main potters in Southern Oregon, Todd and Hanna, again both had characteristics, differences in the clays. I'm not going to go into all the differences in elements in the clays, but just looking at the trace elements, there were different kinds of clays, and that's something you can pick up too. Incidentally, there's practically no Todds. There's only about 5 to 6 Todds in existence, but there's a lot of Hannas. And you can find, if you ever go down to Jacksonville, you'll see what I mean. Okay, next please. Okay, this is the name of the game. This is the blue muck. This is the way it looked at Muddy Creek, and I couldn't believe my eyes because Barnett Ramsey spent half his life going around looking for the blue muck, and here it was, very close to him there. And the blue muck fires a very relatively high temperature at 1200 centigrade. 1200 centigrade, and it really needs very little glazing because it's almost permeable. The porosity levels are very low on it, and so it's a very fine clay. And even today, craft potters come down to Muddy Creek to dig this blue muck and use it on their pots. So that's what it looks like. Next, please. Now, the neutron activation. Well, as I said, we were fortunate to get a grant so that we could test using neutron activation. The reactor itself, which is a big chamber, which basically bombards the items with beta rays and so gamma and beta rays, you don't get very close to that. They call it a swimming pool, but you don't want to swim in that water. However, associated with that is a computerized machine that gives you what they call the count on each element, each chemical element in the piece that's being tested. And this is what it looks like. Next, please. This is what the first chart we get. This was prepared by Dr. Martin Strack at Portland State University, who's using the machine to test salt samples. And so he did a couple of charts for me showing the relative chemical abundance of some of our charts. Next, please. So we have looking at the regional clusters again. And I'll have to go out here where you don't hear me as well. But you can see that we still have a lot of possibility for research. Even today, we're finding new things, especially with the genealogical revolution. I'm finding more information, even on Ancestry.com and Heritage Quest that we never would have thought of on these potters and their relatives, where they came from. One of the things I found out was that Solomon Way, the best potter, had family in Pennsylvania, and one of them was a redware potter. And I even found a picture of his redware pottery, and it looks like Solomon Way's. So wow, the sky's the limit with the kinds of things we can do with that kind of research. Next, please. Now, what happened after the mechanization and the importation of other materials and so forth? Well, this is a good example. Palouse Pottery Company, one of the biggest pottery companies in the Northwest in the 1880s, 1890s, and into the 1900s, basically used a completely different kind of glaze. They imported what is called a Bristol glaze. You've seen a lot of Bristol glaze, I'm sure. This is a churn. And the Bristol glaze involves zinc oxide. It's a completely different glaze. It has to be ordered from New Jersey, and they got amounts of it. And most of the pottery that came out after, say, 1895, it was using this glaze. This is from the Palouse Pottery Company. It gives you an example of what is happening in more modern times. Next, please. And what happened to Buena Vista? Well, Buena Vista itself, which was one of the largest pottery works on the West Coast, they moved their whole operation to Portland, Front Avenue, where Terminal 2 is now. And they had a huge operation there, but they were not making the kind of pottery we see over here, except for one thing. They were making one of these chimney attachments that Ollie has, and Ollie will explain to you. Because by that time, the other kinds of containers, glass and metals and so forth, had replaced all of the need for silverware and redware. And the main thing they were doing, they moved it to Portland because for 20 years they had the contract with the city of Portland to do all the sewer pipe and water pipe. And wow. I grew up. One of the places I grew up at was near near the Willamette River, practically on the Willamette River, and we saw these great big what we thought were ceramic pipes coming out, dumping sewage into the river for many years, and that was the case in Portland. Most of you who lived in East Portland or West Portland knew that, I guess. Well, that's where it came from. That's where not the sewage, but the pipes that issued that. So they had a huge operation. They lasted until about 1904, and then they sold the whole operation to a company in Seattle, which used their clay beds, but really didn't make pottery. They just sold clay. Next, please. So what were the changes? Well, moving over because I don't have a light here. All of of course, the early types, the early Clackamas County redware potters were all discovered. Many of them were tested by Chuck and Ellison when they led OAS members there, and I thought they did a good job at some of the sites. The Lynn County sites, Barnett Ramsey, and then the Gilmore complex were easy to work on, but
there were landowners involved, and so we had a lot of problems with that. The Polk County sites, the Smith family sites, and the Sullivan Way site was under a freeway. Just looking at all of them, the Hannah site was very well written up, and if you go to Jacksonville to their museum, you can see even a replica of the inside of the kiln and so forth. And then the Todd site basically involved someone's backyard, and we did go there. We were allowed to spend an afternoon looking at wasters and so on. Not too much of this still exists, and so those people like Ollie and Blaine himself and a few others, only a handful of others really, who have collected this, we still need to know more about them, and we need to know, I think, my approach would be, we need to know more about the science of them so we can be more sure that they're really what they claim to be. And but they're a fascinating study. Next, please. Okay, and just very rapidly, this is a pot of William Ramsey Jr. He went from Buda Vista, from that pottery, to create a pottery in Latah, Washington, and you can see he was a lot smoother and nicer, even though his handle has fallen off, I think, in Latah. Next, please. And these are examples of my favorite potter, who was Samuel Grove, who was operating in Damascus and moved to Eden Valley in Washington. The reason I like him the best is my favorite story about collecting. All the trips that Blaine and Nick Hugh and I took to Washington, I usually drove, and they would have first out of the car when we came to antique stores. Well, there was one big exception. In Colfax, I don't know, something told me that we were heading for a really neat store. And I told Blaine, you drive. So he drove, he stopped. I was first out of the car, and I was about from here to Charlie, ahead of him. And as I walked in the door, I saw this. I said, that's a Samuel Grove, and it's mine. I went up to it. The man was looking at me like I was a morphine addict or something. How much is it? I don't care. I'll buy it at whatever. He said, well, it's $35 to you. So I bought it for $35. Wow. Blaine got one later, something like it, and he sold it. He sold it eventually because he has a lot of the Grove now for $350. So that's archaeologists aren't supposed to gloat about commercial things, but at that point I will. Okay, next please. Okay, and again, without going into it, we tested the Washington shards too, and you can see again the so-called profiles, the elemental profiles are completely different. We have different kinds of clays that could easily be tested, and we could easily determine, anyone's whether it matches. You might come up though in your tests. You might take an MEI chart, and they'll give you a chart of highs and lows that don't match anything. You've got a new potterer, and probably someone selling into the Oregon Territory from outside, probably Midwest or something like that. Next, please. Okay. Finally, a kudo. One of the things that makes this so exciting for me is this personality thing. These pots, they're not like Dixie cups. They're not like Pepsi Cola bottles. They're one of a kind. They were made by human beings, and even the craft potters who have tried to duplicate these things, you'd be appalled. They don't even come close because they were made by individuals using, I might add, clay that was mixed by them themselves, filtered by them. Often a glaze itself that was concocted from a kind of a lighter slip. These were the last vestiges of human beings on our planet. Think about this. All of you who love human craft work should like this kind of stuff too. Thank you very much. I'll take a few questions.
Harvey?
Yeah, I want to turn the light on someplace.